Today's topic is...
what your army's colors say about you three.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to Waypan. I'm Cal.
And I'm Sunny.
Last time we told you that there was a cultural and biological effect to color psychology.
But this time we're going to talk about how color character affects color.
Color character?
Time for the absolute basics again.
Hue is...
the color of the color.
Saturation is...
the vibrancy of the color.
and values are...
how light or dark a color is by mixing black or white.
As you begin to change a color's saturation, so too do you change its meanings. The more desaturated it is,
the less meaning it has.
the closer you get to grey, the closer you get to neutrality. Thus, you move away from the color's color psychology and towards grey's color psychology.
In other words, the meanings just become less intense.
However, that isn't the only way you can change a color's color psychology.
If you want the color to have more positive meanings, just make it brighter. If you want it to have more negative meanings, just make it darker.
It's simply that easy. No, honestly it is. Changing a color's value can also change how it's perceived.
The midnight blue of a night sky has very different meanings compared to that of a sky blue.
The light blue of a sky blue indicates peace to us because we don't have to worry about the weather. That's just one less thing that's on our mind.
You may enjoy the nightlife, but for the longest period of time in human history, the night is when the danger comes.
Finally, there's one last factor that changes colors' color psychology.
Combining colors.
If you just take a look at colors, you might notice that both the ultramarines and the night lords have the exact same color scheme.
As one commenter said, blue equals stability, communication, etc. Me looking nervously at my night lord's kill team.
When you combine colors in a color scheme, certain color psychologies will become dampened.
Blue and red have the most stable, cross-cultural color psychologies.
However, the color psychology profiles are almost the opposite of one another.
So when you combine them, you will dampen many of the elements of the other color.
Those things combined create the negative color psychology of the Night Lords.
Stubborn, violent, depressive, and cold anger.
But when you look at the positive traits,
Confidence, loyalty, honesty, and strength.
doesn't that sound like our boys in blue, the Ultramarines?
Sure does. If you want to learn more about how colors interact, please watch our video, What Your Scheme Says About You.
So we've taken a long time to get to the actual colors of this color psychology video. But why? So that you can have these important bits of information to understand why their color psychology changes.
Now we're going to cover both tertiary colors and metallics in this video.
We're not going to cover associated colors. You can take a look at that in in-depth color psychology. Let's start with the Aqua family. You might already be thinking, hey, what do you mean, the Aqua family? But both teal and cyan fit both within the Aqua family, yet their color psychologies couldn't be any more different because of one thing.
Water, the giver of life and the taker of life.
As we said before, sky blue and midnight blue have very different meanings for humans. So, lighter aqua colors like cyan represent the life-giving water, the sparkling stream or warm tropical waters. This brings to mind thoughts of peace, harmony, and tranquility.
Whereas teal is associated with the sea, which is literally synonymous with treachery.
Like a certain Horus.
Yes, the Sons of Horus color scheme should have been a warning to all. Biblically, the sea is connected with chaos, which is extremely fitting for where the Horus heresy turns to. This is why these connections and meanings are more deeper ingrained in us than we can understand.
This is likely why these colors are chosen, not out of conscious thought, but perhaps because people linked these ideas with these colors.
Although we're not denying the fact that there are many talented artists that have been working with Games Workshop throughout the ages, it would be foolish to think that all of them have this level of insight with all their designs.
However, like all colors, the darker aquas like teal do have positive aspects.
Such as spirituality, luxury, and beauty.
That's just the external. They're also linked with the internal.
Such as free thinking, meditation, and introspection.
Yeah, being a war master and meditating and introspecting, I'm not sure that that's the best combination.
That could lead to some treacherous thoughts.
You know what else is treacherous?
What?
Changing a topic without letting anyone know.
Hey!
Violet.
Violet is a natural color as compared to purple, which is actually made.
What do you mean it's a made color? All colors are made.
Yeah, okay, but like you mix purple by mixing red with blue, whereas violet is a naturally occurring color because that's what you see on the spectrum of light. It has a very short wavelength, and that is what you see as compared to purple.
Isn't it the shortest wavelength?
Yeah, it is the shortest wavelength.
And what you mean by natural is that's what we actually see in the rainbow compared to purple.
This is correct.
Sunny, why don't we see a lot of the purple family when it comes to wargaming? For example, games like Warhammer 40k and Warhammer Fantasy. We see hardly any purple family factions.
Well, because purple is a really rare occurring color in nature. The only times that we see it in abundance is when we cultivate it, like with grapes or with lavender. And this color is also associated with magic and mysticism, as well as narcissism.
Do you think that maybe that narcissism comes with the obsession with magic?
Yeah, I would say so. And it's also a color that is quite close to femininity, which is why it's difficult for us to see this in wargaming. It's not very practical. But historically speaking, purple dye was also really hard to make, which is why it was reserved for the nobility and royalty.
Do you think this is why we see it in somebody like the Daruchi, or rather the Dark Elves as they're more commonly known?
Absolutely, because it's a color that represents a lot of pride, again, going back in relation to royalty, and these are very prideful factions, and therefore violet is perfect for them.
Yeah, they are just a tad prideful. Just a tad.
Let's take a look at the Navigators. They also use violet. Well, they are also seen as a noble faction, and they're also very prideful and egotistical.
Just a tad prideful.
So a really great example of a use of violet in their scheme.
I think a good example of that would be the 40k game Rogue Trader.
Oh, of course. Yeah, like the character Cassia Orselio.
Yeah, she's completely broken, but what about her?
Yeah, she definitely, if you remember one of the lines, one of the characters was trying to get frisky with her, and she was like, how dare they? They're beneath me.
We wanted to talk about the Thousand Sons and the Emperor's Children.
But time is a thing.
Magenta. Magenta is the invisible color.
Magenta falls between purple and red on the color wheel. However, since these two are on the opposite ends of the spectrum of light, there's no wavelength that corresponds to that color. As such, the brain averages out separate wavelengths, resulting in a bright shade that some argue technically doesn't exist.
And most of our modern printing industry revolves around it, yet it's one of the youngest colors that we have.
A French chemist created this color under the name Fuchsin, but it didn't actually kick off until the Battle of Magenta.
Most color names are so deeply ingrained in language that they're before time, essentially, when it comes to recorded history.
Because of this, magenta's color psychology isn't very stable, and it'll shift between different cultures.
And it is seen as the artist's color. Perhaps this is why it's linked with creativity and imagination.
Probably because it's so eye-catching, vibrant, and unique.
However, in feng shui, it's connected with harmony, so you can see how it's very different when it crosses cultural boundaries.
Some also say that it's a very warm and inviting color.
However, that may not be the case for a lot of people because it's a very eye-straining color, just like yellow.
Despite the fact that this color is made up of red and purple, we think you should be looking towards yellow for its color psychologies.
Because it's full of energy, but also because of that eye strain, it has a lot of relations to that of yellow.
Once again, the only faction that's sporting this color is the Dark Elves, and I think there's one reason why this color does not really happen in wargames.
And that's the 80s. Wargaming started to become popular during the 80s. And who were we selling to? Young boys, and eventually young men.
And what's the opposite of grimdark fantasy and sci-fi?
Perhaps a neon pink?
Definitely.
So, Sunny, where do you think we should use magenta?
With maliciously trickster characters or maliciously evil characters?
So Zinch.
Definitely.
But, Sunny, I think we've covered about as much as we can with an imaginary colour.
Let's move on to something that is real.
Like
Vermillion.
Vermillion is most closely linked to that of autumn.
Most colors in color psychology are linked to the natural world.
However, from those natural things, there are cultural elements. For example, Halloween is almost a completely American invention.
That is a modern tradition. However, there's a more traditional aspect to this, which is harvesting.
There's also feelings of melancholia, this feeling that things are changing and possibly not for the better.
Probably because it's the season right before winter where everything dies. eyes.
Probably, yeah, I would say you're right on that
But
one.
I would have to say that this particular color is too warm for it to invite melancholia, especially with Thanksgiving being another tradition during this season. So I would say that this color is great for something that sports warmth and fiery vigor.
I'm not sure I agree 100%. I think the problem is it's a very culturally dependent color.
When it comes to the theme of autumn, a lot of factions like Sylvaneth or the Wood Elves would sport this color. But when we move a little bit away from the autumn theme, we have factions that are representing the literal fiery warmth of this color, and they are the Fire Slayers.
In fact, this is a great way to use this color for color psychology. Use it for people who you want to show are fiery and passionate.
And hot-headed.
So are we going to talk about the Angels Vermillion?
They're not even Vermillion.
Are you? Okay.
Yes.
I guess we're moving on.
Amber.
Amber is essentially the mellow yellow. Most of the time when people are talking about yellow, they actually use this color instead.
But it does have a little bit of contradicting statements, like, for example, it's associated with safety and warning, but it's also associated with warmth.
Amber is essentially yellow with all of those spastic, childlike, very energetic elements taken away from it and instead brought back to a smooth, mellow yellow.
It's a calmed yellow that's more warm and inviting.
Essentially, you're going to see this with Warhammer factions where instead of them being completely uncontrollably energetic like orcs, you'll see this yellow used with more controlled factions like the Uriel Elder or factions of the Lightbringer Elves.
Don't you meet the Lumineth Realm Lord Elves? Another one would be the Army of Everland.
Oh yeah, that is actually what the color Avalanche Sunset is. It is an amber.
Exactly.
Are we surprised that it's a major agricultural center?
Not really, not with these colors.
I guess it's time to move on to Chartreuse. Nature's first green is golden.
Chartreuse is named after a French liqueur produced in the 1600s by Carthusian monks in medieval France, sending off a strong vibe of individuality, rebelliousness, and creativity. Chartreuse is predominantly used in environments that encourage progressive thinking, bold decisions, and self-expression.
Or, simple terms, youthful vitality.
In the modern world, Chartreuse became a favorite decorative color in tech offices and corporate environments due to its bold and futuristic subtleties.
However, it's no longer considered modern. In fact, if you're to use this color, it would more be indicative of retrofuturism.
You can see retrofuturism in franchises like Fallout.
However, in terms of wargaming factions, there's not going to be a lot who are associated with this because of that association with youth, meaning literally the noobs. There is one Warhammer faction that is strongly connected with this color, which is the Necrons.
But in their case, it's actually more close to a neon green. But we should also consider the fact that Tesseract Glow is actually a proper Chartreuse. If we were to use this for a faction, one that comes to mind is the Star Wars Rebels, and we would use this in combination with orange to show that they're new and fresh on the scene.
As well as idealistic and youthful. Before we move on to metallics, we want to have a quick word about tertiary colors. Tertiary colors are the most variable of all color psychologies. We showed you that with the Aqua family.
So, the thing to remember here is the lesson of magenta. Objectively speaking, we can prove that there is no individual wavelength of light that is related to magenta. It's our brain's best guess, and yet we can all see it. So, perception is reality. One of the arguments Cal and I get into all the time is that I see emerald as a very different color compared to him.
Yes, she sees it as a more light gem color, whereas I see it as an emerald color.
Well, emerald is a gem, which I would say is a gem color. Anyway, when you search on the internet for some of these tertiary colors, they have some pretty variable results.
In fact, some of the times you'll look up a color and it will have the exact same name, yet a different color.
Yeah, which is really, really hard.
The reason why we give this caveat is because we have noticed once we go into tertiary colors, that's when we tend to get the color snobs. They'll say red, yellow, and blue aren't the real primary colors. Oh no, it's cyan, magenta, and yellow. And here's the thing. No, they're not the real primary colors either, because our eyes see in red, green, and blue. If we want to have arguments like this, they're not productive. The perfect is the enemy of the
good.
We are, if you will excuse the pun, trying to give you color psychology information with a warhammer coat of paint.
Our goal is to give you useful, entertaining, and engaging information so that you can actually retain what we're saying.
We have done very in-depth videos before. For example, practical color psychology application.
And it was dry as a bone.
It was very useful.
If you could get through it.
The reason we go on this long diatribe is because of metallics.
If you thought tertiary colors were extremely variable, wait till you see metallics, because it all depends on not only just the color, but their reflectiveness level.
When it comes to metallics and color psychology, we had to do a lot of our own research.
Because when it comes to metallic psychology, it's not very well explored.
You have to remember, the reason why we have a lot of our color psychology analysis is because of the art world, and only recently were we able to paint metallics.
He means metallic paints.
Either through mica flakes or otherwise.
Traditionally, metallic surfaces was simulated through the use of various shades and tones to create gradients.
Thus, we had color psychology for the various colors used rather than for metallics themselves when it comes to art and art history.
Gold and iron have the most stable color psychologies of all the metallics.
This is likely due to the preciousness of gold and also the usefulness of iron.
When it comes to the neutrals of these metallics, chrome, silver, and iron, they can be very variable. All these colors start with the base color of gray, but what changes their meanings entirely is their reflectiveness level.
Though some might have a slight tint of blue, this does remain true. At least when it comes to these colors, we've seen as the reflectiveness value increases, so does the technological level.
It's only through form do these meanings change, like for example a knight in shining silver armor or cold iron rivets.
So one of the most difficult things with this is to get your reflective value right. So if you are doing true metallic metal
or metallic paints,
you have to check with someone to make sure that it looks like what you want it to look like. Please check out our video, Reading Colors, if you need help.
When it comes to bronze, brass, and gold, it's highly dependent on their colors. Bronze and copper are more red, brass is more brown, and gold is more yellow. But when does a bronze turn to a brass, or a brass into a burnished gold? That's up to the individual to decide.
We apologize for having to go through so many considerations for this, but we think it's important. But because of this, we're going to go through them in lots of three: iron, silver, and chrome.
And then brass, bronze, and gold.
Alright, let's do our first group. Steels. Iron has perhaps one of the most stable of all of the color profiles when it comes to metallics, probably because of its association with war.
Yes, in war we use a lot of iron when it comes to the Industrial Revolution, army tanks, weapons, and such. It is seen as a very reliable metal.
Once again, the reality is different. We're not actually talking about iron in each of these cases, but different types of steel. However, it is still associated with iron. It's just like Magenta. Perception is reality.
Yes. Iron is seen as both protective and intimidating because of how weapons are used. You can use them to defend yourself, or you can use them to attack someone. So depending on the context, they can be seen either way.
Don't forget armor. Iron's positive traits comes from its reliability, its dependability, its honesty.
And this is all because it's an extremely durable and hardy metal.
This doesn't mean it doesn't have negative aspects.
For example, it's seen as cold, cruel, and crude, and this is all to do with its dark coloring, especially paired with its low reflectiveness level.
This links it with the blunt end of civilization, the early wars. Not just that, but also butchery and things of this nature. Which links us nicely to the Lord of Iron, Perturabo.
You can see him sporting a lot of iron, in fact, and it's so dark and imposing that he seems very much exactly like all of these negative traits that we have mentioned. He is extremely cruel when you see how he treats his legion. He is also violent and crude, and he can have very predictable logical tactics.
However, with him we see those same positive traits. For example, he drove the entire heresy because he was dependable, honest, and reliable.
But when it comes to the Legion itself, the Iron Warriors, nothing describes them better than being stable, grounded, and intimidating because they're a siege faction.
However, they're not the only Legion linked with iron. There's the Iron Hands.
However, when it comes to the Iron Hands, we don't think they fit the iron profile as much as this next metal, silver.
When it comes to silver as a part of its color profile, not just its negative traits, intimidation becomes key. And one of the reasons for this is because of how it's a gleaming metal.
Yes, like how we see them being used with knives.
Thus, danger is an inherent part of silver.
But unlike iron, silver actually has a cool factor to it.
That's because it looks cool.
Yeah, that's probably why executives and people in higher positions in corporate worlds use them when they wear watches and things like this to look more professional. But other than that, the color itself is a more cool tone, and it's a lot more cool to the touch on your skin as well.
As you can see, silver already has a lot more positive traits, but it doesn't stop there. There's a certain level of confidence that comes with it, precision and sophistication.
Probably because of its use in industrial machinery alongside the use in jewelry.
But it also has a noble heritage. When it comes to certain armor types, for example that of full plate, it was always shown as gleaming and shining.
Thus, it is linked to being reliable and valiant.
However, silver does have negative traits, and they mostly come from the negative traits of both black and white.
For example, take a look at a CEO. Although he looks really fashionable and professional, he is also cold, empty, and indifferent.
Not all CEOs, though. I mean, that I'm sure the ones that would look to support us would be good and fine, and they're not empty and cold. There are CEOs out there looking to support us, right? Silver has a last piece to its dark side. It is unimaginative and violent. And the reason why it is violent is probably because it is linked to war along with iron. However, that side of where one becomes steel and one becomes iron is hard to see.
And when it comes to it being unimaginative, it probably comes from its association with the use of it in machinery. What with it being really precise and single-minded in use and all.
While you might not be able to call the Iron Hands Primarch cold, you can certainly call the Legion cold, especially after his death.
Cold, indifferent, and violent would be a really good way of describing them for the remainder of the heresy.
Actually, I think rather than indifferent, empty would be a better way of describing them. That's how they felt. They felt as if they'd lost their purpose.
Yeah, probably because they were also grieving. But when it comes to their indifference, it's not their inability to be angry, but how they treated everyone else around them.
But that's enough about the heresy. Let's talk about something older and more futuristic.
The heck you talking about?
Chrome is connected with simplicity, being untouched and pure.
Wait a minute. Aren't these just the traits of white?
Yes, in fact, many of the traits of the metals, more specifically the neutral metals, what we call the steels, are linked with black and white, but none of the meanings from grey.
This is due to the fact that they are reflective in nature. They're either bright or dark, but never in between.
Especially when compared with each other.
In fact, iron and silver are both connected to our past and our present. War and civilization. Industrialization for all its goods and ills.
So are you surprised now to find out that chrome is linked with futurism?
Not the future, but futurism. This is a specific art style in portraying the future in a positive light with hope.
Thus, chrome is connected with cleanliness, clarity, and hope. All traits that it takes from white, but it also takes positive traits from black, elegance, and seduction. This is because of how it is used. It is used to show shape forms like black does.
When it comes to chrome, take all of the negative traits from silver and take it up to 11. If silver seemed empty, chrome is like a void. It is nothingness and soullessness. The key factor of chrome is its hyper-reflectiveness, almost exactly like a mirror. So when it's reflecting everything back at you, it has nothing of its own to show.
In fact, that reflection is twisted. This is where we found one of its last negative traits, which is that of parody. It shows you, but in a warp and twisted form, like a funhouse mirror. But there is one genre in particular that uses it a lot for its negative trait of despair, which is that of cyberpunk.
However, the only way chrome can be used negatively is used to reflect a negative environment. And who better to represent this metal than the Necrons, completely empty, void of life, and a parody of what they once were. With chrome and its hyper-reflective properties, it actually resembles that of water, which is great because it also shows like a living metal style, and that's why it's really good for the Necrons. But I can see why GW doesn't use this, because another key factor of the Necrons design is the bright neon green. And when you place bright neon green next to an already very bright metal, there's not a lot of contrast. And this is a great example of how something can be conceptually sound, but when it's applied practically, it doesn't work out.
You know, like the Necrons and their contract with the Satan. That laugh was almost as fake as the Satan's intentions.
Oh.
Finally, let's move on to golds.
Like with iron, silver, and chrome, it seems that the darker and less reflective metals like brass have a correlation with the past and low technological advancement.
Just because it's the past doesn't mean that it's bad. For example, nostalgia is a thing, but there is something that is connected with it, which is simplicity and dependability.
It's probably because of the lack of polishing. It makes a metal look more purposeful rather than polished and precise, like something that you would use for jewelry.
Because of this, it has a certain level of warmth, a calmingness, a reassuringness to it.
Probably because the main tones used in it is brown, which is connected to the earth.
Speaking of brown and being in the mud, it also feels tacky, cheap, and crude.
And due to that crudeness, if you use it in large amounts, it can seem brutalistic and show a sense of cold anger.
This is probably due to its connections to red at its higher points and that feeling of anger with red.
And once again, with the color transitions, it's hard to tell when a brass becomes a bronze and the other way around. It's up to you to decide.
However, there is one faction that really fits with it, and we're just going off the cuff with this one, but do you remember the Minotaurs?
Oh, yes! Oh, this would fit them really well. Minotaurs are part bull, which is used to show that hot-headed bullish type of trait, and that's why brass is really good for complementing this trait.
But despite their bullish symbol, they actually have that cold anger that we talked about. Remember when they were attacking the Lamenters?
Yep.
And there was that very tense situation when the Lamenters surrendered, but you were like, oh, are they actually going to accept it or not?
Yeah.
And they seemed very crude then. I think that this is the perfect colour for them.
Indeed.
Shall we move on to bronze?
You'll find that with bronze, the color profile traits are very similar to that of brown.
That's because of how earthy it feels. It feels like a very dependable color once again. We see dependability a lot with the metals, and the reason is because you can rely on them.
And because it feels a little bit more ancient, it has a feeling of maturity, truthfulness, and of course, dependability.
With such a strong foundation, it feels strong, secure, supportive.
Maybe not as supportive in an emotional point of view, but perhaps more in a practical point of view, like it's reliable.
However, there are a lot of negative traits to this metal, and I'd say that a lot of them come from the Olympics.
Oh, definitely. When it comes to the medals and you've won third place, I think some of the traits, like, for example, mediocre, disappointment, or even resentment come through with this medal.
Yeah, and I'd say that the next two definitely come through, whereas it feels cheap and boastful.
Well, I will say that these things are more closely related to cultural significances than it is more to like biological stuff.
Oh yeah, no, I definitely think that most of the metallics come through when it comes to cultural rather than biological, and I think it's because they're so connected with civilization.
Exactly.
After all, we weren't out there hunting brass monkeys now, were we? Now, there's a faction that does fit this, but I don't know where to put it with brass or bronze.
Okay, and which one?
And the thing is, I think that Khorne perfectly fits this, that sort of, you know, cold anger and all of that, but it feels like it fits in between both of them.
It is, yeah.
And it could fit either of them or neither.
Yeah, so again, this is one of those cases where you don't know when one becomes the other, or it's up to you where you want to place things. I think something to note here is when you're trying to plan out a color scheme based on the meanings and things are getting a little too overcomplicated, there is nothing wrong with just falling back to aesthetically pleasing color choices.
Choices?
Choices, sorry.
Moving on to gold. Unlike everything else here, gold's color psychology is rock solid.
Isn't gold meant to be a soft metal?
Yeah, it might be a soft metal, but its meanings are not. Its meanings may as well be carved in stone.
This is probably due to the fact that gold is rare, and combined with the fact that it's shiny, people really like it a lot.
Gold gives off a feeling of wealth and power.
As well as privilege, prestige, and prosperity.
And we haven't even gotten to its actual positive traits. Those are just the traits it's linked with, and this is cross-culturally viable.
Yes, it is. In Hindu practices, gold is seen as a positive conductor of energy, which is why people are encouraged to wear it when they come to temple.
However, Hinduism isn't the only culture that venerates gold. Many religious institutions as well as cultural institutions respect gold, and some of the times that overlap is so strong that you don't know where that veneration comes from, the religion or the culture.
Right. Is it any surprise that gold is linked with confidence, success, and optimism?
As well as charisma, but from that charisma comes its dark side. It feels heartless, uncaring, and dispassionate.
This probably comes from traits of people who lust after gold.
I would have to agree. Merchants the world over had that reputation because they were seeking to improve their wealth over everything else.
Yes, and it's really closely related to the sense of greed.
But coming from religion once again, some of the traits that are attributed to it is due to that religious nature, the feeling of being untrusting, the feeling that this is a soulless substance.
This is exactly why we felt that the Stormcast Eternals were not a good choice to have gold in it.
If you wanted to look more like a soulless cash grab, you know what you could do? You could have your main characters just plated in gold and saying, this is the new thing, get with it.
We did an entire breakdown of this color scheme in our color crime video.
Which is really funny because we really like the Stormcast Eternals, just so long as they don't have that goofy helmet or this color scheme.
Exactly. Like we said, when you use it in such large amounts, it shows that greediness.
As well as the blue, but we're kind of spoiling things. Go check out the episode. Alright, Sunny, I think that's everything.
Finally, we have finished the video.
Okay, guys, you know how it goes, and I hope you enjoyed this very long episode. So, keep those brushes wet. Bye-bye. Sunny, I have a dark and terrible feeling.
Oh no, what is it?
I think that they might want more color psychology.
Oh no!
Well, I think we can't really keep going with this color psychology thing. We could do associated colors, but I feel like we're really milking it at this point, and that's why we stopped it last time.
Yeah, which is why we have started a new potential series because what your color schemes say about you.
Ah, no, it's what your schemes say about you.
Yes.
No, schemes.
Schemes. Yes.
Maybe okay. So please check out Black, White, and Red, the colors of violence.
But they are going to ask for another one.
Why you do this to me?
Color Psychology 4, Cal Crying.